It was supposed to be a fresh start, a chance for a struggling mother and her son to rebuild their lives after years of heartbreak. But what began as hope quickly spiraled into something far darker. When love, betrayal, and hidden desires collided, the truth emerged with devastating consequences. This is the story of a family torn apart by secrets that should never have been hidden. In Jackson, Mississippi, the summer heat pressed down like a heavy weight. For Lisa Johnson, that oppressive heat mirrored her struggles. At just 32 years old, she had been forced to start over, not because she wanted to, but because she had no other choice. Her husband, John, had vanished one day, leaving behind their 6-year-old son, Alex, and an empty bank account. With no savings and nowhere to turn, Lisa was left to pick up the pieces of a life that had shattered without warning. The only option she had was to move back to her childhood home, a small, worn-out house at the edge of town. The house hadn't changed much over the years. The wallpaper was faded, the floors creaked with every step, and the furniture looked as tired as she felt. To Lisa, the house felt like a prison, a place she had worked so hard to leave behind, but now found herself trapped in once again. Lisa's mother, Evelyn, opened the door and welcomed them in without hesitation. At 58, Evelyn wasn't in the best shape herself. Her health had been declining for years, her heart condition growing worse as time went on. Yet, she didn't complain. She knew Lisa and Alex had nowhere else to go. Evelyn did her best to help, but her frail body couldn't do much. Most days, she spent her time watching Alex while Lisa worked long hours at the local grocery store. Lisa took every shift she could get, sometimes working double shifts just to scrape by. Her body ached from the constant work, and by the time she got home, all she could think about was collapsing into bed. For Alex, life had changed in ways he didn't understand. The bright, playful boy he used to be was growing quieter. He spent most of his time alone, drawing pictures or watching TV. When he heard Lisa's car pull into the driveway at night, his little face would light up. But that excitement would fade when she came inside, too tired to do anything but say a quick good night. Lisa knew she was missing out on Alex's childhood. She saw it in the way his shoulders slumped when she said she couldn't play with him, or in the way he quietly put his crayons away when she walked past. But there was nothing she could do. Every dollar she earned was one step closer to keeping the electricity on, to making sure Alex had food on the table. Evelyn noticed what was happening. She saw the way Alex's eyes lit up when Lisa walked through the door, only to dim when she didn't have the energy to stay up with him. She saw Lisa's exhaustion, the weight she carried every day. But Evelyn's health kept her from doing much more than sitting in her favorite chair, watching as her daughter and grandson drifted further apart. Life in the small house settled into a routine. Lisa would leave early in the morning, often before Alex woke up. Alex would spend his days playing quietly, while Evelyn tried to keep up with him as best as she could. By the time Lisa came home, it was late, and the house was quiet. Alex would already be in bed, and Evelyn would be dozing in her chair, her pill bottles lined up on the table next to her. Lisa's guilt followed her everywhere. She thought about Alex when she was bagging groceries or stacking shelves. She wondered if he was lonely, if he missed her. But the bills wouldn't stop coming, and there was no one else to help. She told herself it was only temporary, that one day she'd be able to spend more time with him. Evelyn worried too. She had raised Lisa in that house, and now she was watching history repeat itself. She remembered how hard it was to raise Lisa alone after her own husband had passed. Now she was watching Lisa go through the same struggles, Only this time, Evelyn couldn't do much to help. Her body was failing her, and every day felt like a reminder that she didn't have much time left. Alex didn't understand the weight of everything happening around him. All he knew was that his mum wasn't around as much as she used to be. He started keeping to himself more, spending hours drawing pictures of superheroes or families that looked like the one he wished he had. At school, his teachers noticed that he rarely joined the other kids at recess. He would sit alone, his head bent over a piece of paper, lost in his own little world. Lisa didn't see how much Alex was changing. She was too focused on surviving, on making it through one day at a time. When she did notice, it was in small moments, like the way Alex avoided eye contact, or how his smile didn't quite reach his eyes anymore. She told herself that things would get better, that she just needed to work harder for a little longer. Evelyn, however, saw the cracks forming. She could feel the tension in the house, the unspoken sadness that hung in the air. She wanted to say something, to tell Lisa to slow down, to remind her that Alex needed her now more than ever. But she held back, knowing that Lisa was already carrying more than she could handle. At night, when the house was quiet and Alex was asleep, Lisa would sit on the porch with a cup of coffee. She would stare out into the darkness, thinking about the life she had dreamed of for herself and Alex. It wasn't supposed to be like this. She had imagined a future where she and John raised Alex together, where they shared the responsibilities and joys of parenthood. But that dream had disappeared the moment John left, and now all she had were bills, exhaustion, and the guilt of not being enough. In the small, worn-out house in Jackson, life carried on. Lisa worked, Evelyn watched, Alex waited. From the outside, they looked like a family trying to make it work, but inside the cracks were growing deeper, and the fragile sanctuary they had built was starting to crumble. No one knew it yet, but those cracks would soon give way, and life as they knew it would never be the same again. It was a quiet Tuesday when Lisa met Paul Rivers, but that day marked the beginning of a new chapter in her life. Paul wasn't the kind of man who would stand out in a crowd. He had broad shoulders, rough hands, and a face that showed years of hard work. He was steady, dependable, and carried himself with a calm confidence that immediately put Lisa at ease. Paul first came into Lisa's life through her job at the grocery store. He came in looking for some tools, and their conversation started casually. Something about his demeanor felt different. He wasn't trying to impress her, and he didn't come off as flashy or overbearing. Instead, he listened. He asked questions about her day, about Alex, and even about the little things that most people wouldn't bother with. For Lisa, those small interactions became something to look forward to. It wasn't long before Paul became a familiar presence in her life. He began to stop by the store more often, timing his visits to her shifts. Over time, he worked his way into her routine. Before Lisa fully realized it, Paul started showing up at the house. At first, it was small gestures. He'd come over to fix a leaky faucet or mend the rickety steps on the porch. Over time, his visits became more frequent, and he began to feel like a natural part of their household. For Alex, Paul's presence was confusing at first. He wasn't sure what to make of this man who suddenly seemed to care so much. But Paul had a patient way of breaking through Alex's walls. One afternoon, Paul showed up with a baseball glove and asked Alex if he wanted to play catch in the yard. Alex hesitated at first, but eventually he gave in. That moment marked the beginning of a bond that Alex hadn't felt with anyone before. Paul made Alex feel seen. He taught him how to fix small things around the house, like patching a hole in the wall or tightening a loose doorknob. These small, shared moments began to bridge the gap between them. Alex, who had spent so much of his life feeling alone, now had someone who made an effort to be there for him. For Lisa, Paul was everything she thought she needed. He brought a sense of stability and support that she hadn't felt in years. With him around, the weight she carried every day seemed a little lighter. He helped with Alex, took care of small repairs, and even managed to bring a sense of normalcy to their lives. But while Lisa was beginning to trust Paul, her mother, Evelyn, remained skeptical. Evelyn had a sharp intuition, the kind that came from years of navigating life's hardships. She watched Paul closely, and something about him didn't sit right with her. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but she sensed that there was more to him than met the eye. Evelyn noticed little things about Paul that made her uneasy. He always seemed too polished, too quick to insert himself into their lives. He would often disappear for hours without explanation, and his excuses didn't always add up. Evelyn's discomfort grew, but she kept most of her thoughts to herself, knowing Lisa wouldn't want to hear them. In her heart, Evelyn felt protective of her daughter and grandson. She had been the one to pick up the pieces after Lisa's husband left, and she wasn't about to let someone new come in and disrupt the fragile stability they had rebuilt. As the months went by, Paul became more involved in their lives. Eventually, he moved into the house, cementing his place in their family. Lisa felt like things were finally coming together. For the first time in a long time, she could breathe a little easier. For Alex, Paul's presence filled a void he hadn't known how to articulate. Paul became someone he could rely on, someone who took the time to teach him and guide him. Alex began to see Paul as the father figure he had never had. But Evelyn's unease didn't fade. She couldn't shake the feeling that Paul was hiding something. She kept a watchful eye on him, noting how his polite smiles sometimes felt forced, or how he avoided direct answers to certain questions. The tension in the house was subtle at first, but it grew over time. Evelyn's disapproval of Paul was evident, though she rarely voiced it outright. Her glances lingered a little too long when he was in the room, and her comments about him carried an edge that Lisa couldn't ignore. Lisa felt torn. She wanted to believe that Paul was the answer to their prayers, the person who could finally bring them the stability they so desperately needed. But Evelyn's silent judgment weighed on her. She tried to push her mother's concerns aside, convincing herself that Evelyn was simply overprotective or paranoid. Evelyn, however, saw things differently. She believed she was seeing the truth that Lisa was too blinded by hope to notice. She watched as Paul grew closer to Alex, and while she was grateful that Alex had someone to look up to, she couldn't shake the feeling that Paul's interest in the boy was too calculated, too convenient. As the weeks turned into months, the fragile balance in the household began to shift. Evelyn's health continued to decline, leaving her more dependent on Lisa and Paul. The strain of her illness only added to the tension in the house. Evelyn's warnings about Paul became more pointed, though they often fell on deaf ears. Lisa was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. She wanted to believe that her mother was wrong, that Paul was the good man she desperately needed him to be. But deep down, a small seed of doubt had been planted. In the quiet moments, when the house was still and Lisa had time to think, she couldn't help but wonder if her mother was right. Was Paul really the savior she had been hoping for? Or was there something darker lurking beneath his calm exterior? The small house that had once been her sanctuary now felt heavy with unspoken tension. Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something that would shatter the fragile peace they had worked so hard to build. By 2016, life in the small house seemed steady at first glance. Paul had become a permanent part of their lives, Alex was smiling more, and Lisa felt like things were finally falling into place. But beneath the surface, everything was starting to unravel, even if Lisa couldn't see it yet. Evelyn's health was failing fast. Her strength was almost gone, and she rarely left her bedroom. Most days she lay in bed, her frail hands trembling as she carefully sorted her medication. The house, once filled with her presence, now felt eerily quiet. But while Evelyn's body weakened, her mind stayed sharp, and her distrust of Paul only grew stronger. She began keeping a diary, jotting down all the strange things she noticed about Paul. Late at night, she would hear him making hushed phone calls. Sometimes she would spot receipts for large cash withdrawals from Lisa's account, amounts that didn't make sense given their tight budget. And then there were the moments when Paul's charming facade would drop. When he thought no one was looking, his smile would fade into something cold, calculating. Evelyn's entries grew more urgent as the days passed. "I don't trust him," she wrote one night, her handwriting shaky. "He's hiding something. Lisa doesn't see it, but I do." While Evelyn's suspicions deepened, Paul and Alex's bond grew stronger. They were inseparable, working on small projects around the house, playing catch in the yard, and watching football together. Paul had become a father figure to Alex, something the boy had longed for since his own father disappeared. To Lisa, seeing them together felt like a blessing. It eased the guilt she carried for all the years Alex had grown up without a male role model. But even as Lisa saw Paul's presence as a good thing, Evelyn felt differently. She noticed how Paul's attention toward Alex felt too intense at times, almost like an obsession. The way he lingered near Alex, always watching, sent shivers down her spine. Evelyn tried to warn Lisa, but her frail voice often went unheard, drowned out by Lisa's belief that Paul was their savior. Evelyn's health continued to decline, and she spent more time confined to her room. Her once strong voice was now barely a whisper. Despite her physical weakness, she tried one last time to reach Lisa. Late one evening, she held her daughter's hand tightly, her eyes full of desperation. Lisa brushed it off, thinking her mother was just being overprotective. She didn't want to believe that Evelyn might be right. Then came the night everything changed. It was a cool October evening when Lisa returned home after another exhausting shift at the grocery store. She expected to hear the usual sounds of the house, the soft hum of the TV in the living room, the clinking of dishes in the kitchen. But as she walked through the front door, an unsettling silence greeted her. Something felt off. Lisa called out for her mother, her voice echoing through the quiet house. There was no answer. Her heart raced as she climbed the stairs to Evelyn's room. Pushing open the door, she was met with a sight that froze her in place. Evelyn was lying motionless on the bed, her face pale, her chest still. Pill bottles were scattered across the nightstand, some open with pills spilled onto the floor. The room felt cold, lifeless. Panic surged through Lisa as she rushed to her mother's side, shaking her gently and calling her name. There was no response. Her mother's skin was cold to the touch, and Lisa's trembling hands fumbled for her phone. She dialed 911, struggling to find the words to explain what she was seeing. Paramedics arrived quickly, their presence filling the house with noise and urgency. They worked frantically, but it was too late. Evelyn was gone. The coroner ruled Evelyn's death as an accidental overdose. They said the combination of her medications had overwhelmed her already fragile system. On paper, it seemed straightforward, but to Lisa it didn't make sense. Her mother had always been careful with her pills, sorting them into neatly labeled containers for each day of the week. The scattered bottles and spilled pills didn't fit the Evelyn she knew. As Lisa tried to process her grief, Paul became her rock. He took over the funeral arrangements, comforting her at every turn. His steady presence was a relief, a source of strength when Lisa felt like she couldn't go on. But no matter how supportive Paul was, Lisa couldn't shake the unease that lingered in the back of her mind. Going through Evelyn's belongings after the funeral, Lisa found her mother's diary. She flipped through the pages, her heart sinking as she read the words. Evelyn had documented every suspicion she had about Paul, every strange thing she had noticed. "He's not who he says he is," one entry read. "I see the way he looks at Alex. There's something wrong." Another entry described a heated argument Evelyn had with Paul. She had confronted him about his secretive behavior, but instead of answering her questions, Paul had brushed her off. Evelyn's words were chilling. "I don't know what he's hiding, but I can feel it. He's dangerous." Lisa's hands shook as she closed the diary. Her mother had tried to warn her, but she hadn't listened. Now Evelyn was gone, and Lisa was left with more questions than answers. Had Paul played a role in her mother's death? Had Evelyn known something she couldn't prove? The house, once a refuge, now felt like a trap. Lisa began to notice small things she hadn't paid attention to before: the way Paul would disappear for hours without explanation, the way he seemed to insert himself into every aspect of her and Alex's lives. The warmth she had once felt toward him was now replaced by a growing sense of dread. But Lisa wasn't ready to confront the truth. Not yet. She told herself she was imagining things, that her grief was clouding her judgment. She didn't want to believe that the man who had brought so much stability into her life could be hiding something so sinister. As the days turned into weeks, Lisa tried to push the doubts aside, but Evelyn's words stayed with her, echoing in her mind whenever she looked at Paul or watched him interact with Alex. The cracks beneath the surface were widening, and it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. Months after Evelyn's death, the house had fallen into an uneasy rhythm. On the surface, things seemed to be moving forward, but the silence that hung in the air was heavy, almost suffocating. Lisa couldn't stop thinking about her mother's warnings, and as much as she tried to brush them aside, they echoed in her mind. The growing distance between her and Alex only made things worse. The once vibrant boy now spent most of his time alone, retreating further into himself each day. One evening, while cleaning out Evelyn's room, Lisa came across her mother's diary again. It had been sitting on the bedside table, untouched since the funeral. The last time she had read it, the words had unsettled her, but grief and exhaustion had pushed the thoughts aside. Now she felt drawn to it, as if the diary might hold answers to questions she didn't even know how to ask. As she flipped through the pages, the unease in her chest deepened. Evelyn had written detailed observations about Paul, his strange behavior, the subtle changes in his demeanor, and the moments when his mask of charm seemed to slip. One passage stopped Lisa cold. "I've seen the way he looks at Alex. Something isn't right. He's hiding more than he lets on." Lisa closed the diary and sat in silence for what felt like hours. Her mother had been trying to tell her something all along, but Lisa hadn't listened. Now, with Evelyn gone, the weight of her warnings felt heavier than ever. But what was Paul hiding? And how did Alex fit into it all? As the days passed, Lisa became more vigilant. She started noticing small things she had overlooked before: Paul's late-night phone calls, the way he always seemed to keep certain parts of his life closed off. But it wasn't just Paul who was acting strange. Alex's behavior was becoming harder to ignore. He avoided eye contact, spent hours locked in his room, and barely spoke during meals. When Lisa tried to talk to him, he would brush her off with vague excuses. One night, while putting away laundry, Lisa noticed a piece of paper sticking out from under Alex's pillow. She hesitated for a moment, feeling like she was invading his privacy, but something urged her to look. She pulled out the note and unfolded it, her hands trembling as she read the words scrawled in her son's handwriting. The note was a confession, a raw, heartbreaking account of secrets Alex had been hiding for years. He wrote about his relationship with Paul, how it had started when he was younger, and how he had felt trapped, confused, and manipulated. The words painted a picture of a vulnerable boy who had been drawn into something far beyond his understanding. Lisa's heart broke as she continued reading, but the worst was yet to come. Near the bottom of the note, Alex revealed the truth about Evelyn's death. "She found out," he wrote. "Grandma knew everything. She said she was going to tell you. I panicked. I didn't mean for it to happen, but it did." The paper slipped from Lisa's hands as the full weight of the confession sank in. Her mother hadn't died from an accidental overdose. She had been silenced by her own grandson. The realization hit Lisa like a punch to the chest, leaving her gasping for air. She thought of all the moments she had missed, the times she had been too busy or too tired to notice what was happening right under her roof. Tears streamed down her face as she tried to process what she had just read. Her son, the boy she had sacrificed everything for, had been hiding a darkness she never could have imagined. And Paul had been the catalyst for it all. He had manipulated Alex, exploited his vulnerability, and destroyed the fragile stability Lisa had fought so hard to create. The note didn't just shatter Lisa's perception of her son, it also confirmed everything her mother had feared. Evelyn had seen through Paul from the beginning, but Lisa had ignored her warnings, brushing them off as paranoia. Now, her mother was gone, and the truth she had tried to reveal had come too late. Lisa sat in Alex's room for hours, clutching the note and staring at the walls, her mind racing. She felt a mix of anger, grief, and overwhelming guilt. How had she missed the signs? How had she allowed Paul into their lives, into their home, into Alex's life? The weight of her mistakes was unbearable. She thought back to all the moments she had trusted Paul, his calm demeanor, his kind gestures, the way he had stepped in when things were falling apart. It had all been a lie, a carefully crafted act to worm his way into their family. And now, because of him, Evelyn was gone, Alex was broken, and Lisa was left to pick up the pieces. Determined to get answers, Lisa searched Alex's room further. In the bottom drawer of his desk, she found more evidence. A string of printed text messages between Alex and Paul. The messages were chilling. Paul had manipulated Alex into keeping their relationship a secret, using guilt and fear to keep him silent. And when Evelyn had confronted Alex, Paul had pushed him into a corner, feeding his panic and fear until he snapped. The messages confirmed what Lisa already knew. Paul had been the puppet master, pulling the strings and leaving destruction in his wake. But Lisa wasn't about to let him get away with it. She needed to confront him, to make him answer for everything he had done. As she sat in the quiet of Alex's room, clutching the note and the messages, Lisa realized the full extent of the betrayal. Paul had destroyed her family from the inside, out, and Alex had been caught in the crossfire. Despite her anger, Lisa knew she couldn't abandon her son. He was still her child, and he was as much a victim of Paul's manipulation as anyone else. But one thing was clear. Paul needed to be stopped.
And Lisa was the only one who could do it. Lisa sat in Alex's room, staring at the confession note she had found, her hands trembling as she tried to make sense of the words on the page. Her heart felt heavy, like it might shatter under the
weight of the truth. She had to face Alex. She had to know everything, even if it tore her apart. That evening, Lisa waited for Alex to return home. When he walked in, she could barely look at him without her chest tightening. She sat him down, at the kitchen table, the note in her hands. Without saying a word, she placed it in front of him. Alex froze as his eyes scanned the page. She could see the fear in his expression, the guilt bubbling to the surface. It didn't take long for Alex to break down. His tears came quickly, his shoulders trembling as he tried to speak through choked sobs. Piece by piece, the truth spilled out, and Lisa listened, her mind racing and her heart breaking. Alex confessed that his relationship with Paul had begun years ago, shortly after Paul moved into their home. It wasn't something Alex had planned or wanted, but Paul had manipulated him, gaining his trust and then taking advantage of his vulnerability. Alex had kept it a secret out of shame and fear, convinced that no one would believe him. But it wasn't just the relationship with Paul that haunted him. Alex admitted to what had happened with Evelyn. She had found out about his relationship with Paul, piecing it together from things she had overheard and seen. Evelyn had confronted Alex, urging him to come clean to Lisa. Alex, terrified of the consequences, panicked. In a moment of desperation, he tampered with her medication, hoping to buy himself time to figure out what to do. He hadn't intended for it to kill her, but the overdose had been fatal. As Lisa listened, her stomach twisted into knots. Her son, the boy she had sacrificed so much for, had been caught in a web of manipulation and lies that had spiraled out of control. The weight of Evelyn's death hit her like a tidal wave. She had ignored her mother's warnings about Paul, and now Evelyn was gone because of it. But Alex wasn't done. He confessed to what had happened the night Paul died. After Evelyn's death, Alex had begun to see Paul for who he really was. The charm and warmth Paul had used to manipulate him had worn thin, and Alex started to see the selfishness and deceit that lay beneath. When Alex discovered that Paul had been unfaithful, it was the final blow. That night, Alex confronted Paul. In a fit of rage, the argument escalated quickly, with years of anger and betrayal fueling Alex's emotions. In the chaos, Alex struck Paul with a blunt object. Paul fell, hitting his head on the edge of the table. When Alex realized what he
had done, panic set in. He fled the scene, leaving Lisa to find Paul's lifeless body the next morning.
Lisa sat frozen, unable to process everything she had just heard. She felt anger, grief, and an overwhelming sense of failure. She had brought Paul into their lives, trusted him, and ignored the warnings. And now her family was shattered beyond repair. The next morning, Lisa made the hardest decision of her life. She took the note and went to the police. She told them everything Alex had confessed, knowing that it would lead to his arrest. It was a choice no mother should ever have to make, but she knew it was the only way to confront the truth and begin to heal. The police acted quickly, and Alex was taken into custody. The investigation into Paul's death reopened, and the evidence backed up Alex's confession. The story made headlines, shocking the community. People who had once admired Paul were horrified to learn the truth about him. Alex's trial was heartbreaking. The court acknowledged the psychological manipulation he had endured, as well as the emotional toll of losing his grandmother and being betrayed by Paul. Instead of prison, Alex was sentenced to a psychiatric facility where he could receive the help he desperately needed. Lisa, left alone in the wake of the trial, felt like a shell of herself. Her mother was gone, her son was in a facility, and the man she had trusted had turned out to be a predator who destroyed her family. The house that had once been a refuge now felt like a prison, filled with memories she couldn't escape. In the weeks that followed, Lisa made the painful decision to leave Jackson. She sold the house and moved to a small town a few hours away, hoping to start over. But the memories followed her. She couldn't escape the image of her mother sitting at the kitchen table, warning her about Paul. She couldn't stop hearing Alex's broken voice as he confessed everything. In her new home, Lisa began to rebuild her life, piece by piece. Therapy became a lifeline, helping her work through the grief and guilt that weighed her down. She found a job at a local community center, where she spent her days helping others, finding purpose in small acts of kindness. Lisa visited Alex regularly at the psychiatric facility. Their conversations were difficult at first, filled with
awkward silences and unspoken pain, but over time they began to open up to each other.
Alex expressed deep remorse for what he had done, his voice trembling as he apologized over and over. Lisa forgave him, though it wasn't easy. She knew he had been a victim, manipulated and broken by Paul's deceit. As the months turned into years, Lisa and Alex began to heal. Their relationship, though scarred, grew stronger. Lisa found strength in her new life, in the small victories of each day. But the past never fully left her. It lingered in the quiet moments, in the memories of her mother's warmth and Alex's childhood laughter. The story of Lisa's family became a cautionary tale, a reminder of how manipulation and deceit could destroy even the strongest bonds. For Lisa, it was a painful lesson, but also one of resilience. She had faced unimaginable loss and betrayal, but she had survived. And though the scars of the past would always be with her, Lisa found hope in the future. Each day was a step forward, a chance to rebuild and to remember that even in the darkest moments, there was still light to be found. Lisa's life had been forever altered by the secrets and tragedies that had unraveled her family. Her once close-knit world had splintered, leaving scars that time could never fully erase. Yet her story became more than just a tale of heartbreak. It became a lesson, a stark reminder of how deceit and manipulation can seep into the foundations of a family, tearing apart even the strongest bonds. After years of struggle, Lisa found a quiet strength she never knew she had. She embraced her journey to heal, though it was often slow and filled with setbacks. Her days were now simpler, filled with moments that she had once taken for granted, tending to a small garden outside her modest home, volunteering at a local shelter, or finding solace in her morning coffee on a peaceful porch. Alex remained in the psychiatric facility, where he was finally receiving the care he needed. Lisa visited him regularly, their conversations becoming a source of comfort and healing for them both. Though the weight of the past still lingered, they found ways to reconnect, to rebuild what had been lost. Alex, too, was finding his path to redemption, grappling with the choices he had made and the life that lay ahead. The people in Lisa's new town only knew fragments of her story, just enough to admire her strength without prying too deeply into her pain. Lisa didn't mind. She had nothing to prove anymore. For the first time in years, she lived for herself, not for the expectations of others or the shadows of her past. Her journey wasn't easy, but it was proof of the resilience of the human spirit. Lisa carried the lessons of her past with her, a constant reminder of how fragile life could be, and how, even in the darkest moments, hope could still be found. Though her family would never be whole again, Lisa's story stood as a testament to the power of perseverance, of facing unimaginable loss and still finding the courage to move forward. And in those quiet, simple moments when the world was still and her heart felt a little lighter, Lisa found peace.